The air inside Buckingham Palace that evening was heavy, so heavy it felt like the chandeliers themselves were listening. A single sound echoed across the grand dining room, the quiet tap of a pen against a glass table, rhythmic, nervous, impatient. At the head of that long table sat King Charles, his hands folded, eyes fixed on the polished surface as if searching for an answer in the reflection. Around him sat Princess Anne, her expression sharp as cut glass, and Prince William, tense, resolute, holding a thin folder that would soon detonate a royal crisis no one could contain. When William opened that folder, silence swallowed the room. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The words inside weren't rumors. They weren't speculation from tabloids or whispers from aides. They were Harry's words, spoken behind closed doors, recorded in confidence, and repeated now by the one person who never wanted to betray his brother. And yet, he did. The question is, what did Prince Harry say that was so unforgivable, so poisonous, that it pushed the royal family to do something they swore they'd never do? Ban him. You see, royal disagreements aren't new. Feuds, resentment, scandal, they're practically stitched into the monarchy's history. But this was different. This was personal. This was betrayal at the level of blood. And here's the shocking part. It wasn't about money, titles, or Meghan Markle. Not this time. It was about what Harry really thought of his family, the people who raised him, protected him, and, in his eyes, imprisoned him. When William repeated those words, something inside Charles reportedly broke. Imagine your own father sitting there, hearing his son accuse him of things that pierced the heart deeper than any public insult could, and then making a decision that no king ever wants to make. But before we get to that night's decision, we need to understand how it all began. Because this wasn't spontaneous. It was the culmination of years of suppressed resentment, quiet phone calls, ignored messages, and late-night conversations between brothers that turned from laughter to bitterness. Let's rewind a few weeks. William had reached out to Harry through private channels. There were whispers that the king himself wanted to mend things, to bring Harry back into the royal fold quietly, without cameras or press releases. The public tension had grown unbearable. Even Queen Camilla reportedly told aides she couldn't stand the perpetual soap opera that followed the Sussexes. So, a meeting was arranged, an off-the-record family summit meant to heal old wounds. The location, a secure room inside Buckingham Palace, known to staff as the Queen's Chamber. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. This was the same room where the late Queen Elizabeth once mediated family disputes. But this time, she wasn't there to calm tempers or remind her sons of duty. This time, it was William's turn to play the role of mediator. Except he didn't come just to talk. He came with evidence. You have to imagine the pressure he felt walking into that room. For years, William had watched Harry turn from a mischievous younger brother into a defiant figure who seemed determined to rewrite royal history. At first, it was interviews. Then came the Netflix specials, the book, the podcast appearances, all hinting that there were darker truths within the royal walls. But according to insiders, what Harry said in private made his public statements look tame. Apparently, during a closed-door conversation with mutual friends and foreign associates, Harry made remarks that were not only offensive but potentially dangerous to the crown's reputation. He questioned his father's integrity, mocked royal tradition, and made comments about the monarchy's future being a relic of ego and deceit. Words like that, once spoken, can't be unsaid. William had learned about this through a mutual contact, someone trusted, someone close enough to both brothers to know it wasn't gossip. And when he confronted Harry about it privately, Harry didn't deny it. He simply said, "You finally heard the truth, didn't you?" It wasn't an apology. It was a provocation. And that's when William made a decision of his own, to bring the matter before the king. But here's where things take a darker turn. Because what began as a conversation about hurt feelings turned into a legal and constitutional dilemma. If Harry's alleged remarks reached the wrong ears, foreign governments, media conglomerates, political rivals, they could undermine the monarchy's stability itself. Charles, who had once tolerated his son's public criticism, could no longer ignore what sounded like contempt for the very institution he swore to protect. So when that meeting began, it wasn't just about emotions. It was about survival. And spoke first. Her voice, sharp and steady, cut through the room. We cannot continue pretending he's one of us if he's become one of them." William didn't respond. He just opened the folder and began to read. Every word landed like a hammer. Charles reportedly turned pale, the kind of pale that only comes from shock, a quiet, stunned disbelief that your child could feel this way. And when William reached the final line, no one spoke. The silence was long enough to hear the clock ticking from the hallway. Then the king whispered something under his breath, too low for aides to hear, but Anne's reaction said enough. She looked down, eyes closed, as if bracing for impact. "What did he say?" One aide later recalled hearing the words, "He's left us no choice." And with that, the conversation shifted. The tone changed from family to institution, from love to protocol, from heartbreak to consequence. That's how it always happens in the royal family. One moment it's tears, the next, it's signatures and statements. But before any official action was taken, something unexpected happened. William, stoic, composed, disciplined William, broke down. He put his head in his hands and said quietly, "I didn't want this. He's still my brother." Charles didn't reply, because he couldn't. He knew what had to come next. The crown must protect itself, always, even from its own blood. And so the wheels began to turn, private briefings, discreet legal calls, coded messages to senior aides. A silent machinery that has existed for centuries, built for one purpose: to preserve the image of the monarchy, no matter the cost. But here's the twist no one expected. Meghan already knew. Somehow, before the palace even drafted its internal memo, a leak had begun. Anonymous sources close to the Sussex circle hinted to American media that a royal meeting had turned catastrophic. They didn't say why. They didn't say how. But the implication was clear. Harry had been cornered. When that leak hit, all hell broke loose inside the palace. Phones rang nonstop. Advisors scrambled. And William realized what he had feared from the beginning, that whatever he said in that room might never stay secret. But the part no one outside those palace walls understood was the emotional weight of it all. Because for William, it wasn't just about loyalty to the crown. It was about loyalty to the memory of their mother. Diana had always told them to stand together, no matter what. And now, decades later, that promise lay shattered under the very roof she once called home. The palace press office began drafting contingency statements. Phrases like ongoing private discussions and no comment were prepared. But behind the scenes, the mood was panic. Camilla, ever the strategist, reportedly advised Charles to act swiftly before the story spiraled. "In the uncertainty," she said, "make a decision before the press does it for you." And Charles, torn between fatherhood and kingship, finally did. But this wasn't exile in the traditional sense. No official announcement, no dramatic statement, just quiet removal, a subtle shift in access, funding, and communication, so subtle that only insiders would recognize it for what it was. Harry, without realizing it, was being written out of the royal system. Phone lines disconnected. Invitations stopped coming. Private correspondence halted. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife, William received one more message, an encrypted email, anonymously sent, containing something that would make his blood run cold. It was an audio file, and on it, Harry's voice, angry, unfiltered, saying words even worse than those William had read aloud. Words that, if verified, would not only destroy Harry's standing, but also justify the palace's every move. That was the final straw. But what happened next? That's the moment history will remember. Because within hours, Charles summoned the Privy Council for an emergency discussion, something reserved for matters of state, not family feuds. And by dawn, the royal communications blackout began. All external contact with the Sussexes was cut. No one inside the palace was to reach out. The ban was in motion. And as the morning sun touched the palace gates, William stood at his window, watching the first photographers gather below, oblivious to the fact that the biggest royal fracture since Edward VIII had just been sealed. But there's something no one outside that room could ever guess. Because before Charles signed the internal memorandum finalizing Harry's removal, he hesitated, just for a moment. He stared at the royal seal, pen trembling, and whispered a name. It wasn't Harry's. It was Diana's. And that single whisper changed the tone of what was to come. Because the decision to ban Prince Harry wasn't just political. It was emotional. It was generational. It was the final act in a story that began decades ago, with a mother who believed love could outshine duty. But love didn't win this time. Duty did. And when the palace clock struck midnight, so did the last chance for reconciliation. What William had revealed had done more than break trust. It broke the bloodline's unspoken code. Never expose family before the world does. And the ripple effect of that revelation would ignite something much bigger than anyone in that room expected. Because while the monarchy thought they were containing the fire, Meghan was already pouring gasoline. The royal corridors were never quiet for long. Not really. Even when no one was speaking, they hummed with secrets, footsteps, and the kind of tension that only power can breed. That morning, after the secret meeting that had left everyone shaken, the halls of Buckingham Palace carried an invisible static. You could almost feel it on your skin, the way you feel the charge before a thunderstorm. And somewhere in that charged silence, a second meeting was being prepared, one that would decide what came next for Prince Harry. Here's a question for you. What happens when a family built on image realizes one of their own has become their biggest liability? Do they forgive, or do they erase? The truth is, the royal family doesn't shout when they're angry. They convene. They plan. They act. Quietly, methodically, ruthlessly. And this time, the meeting wasn't about reconciliation anymore. It was about containment. Inside the crimson-walled conference chamber, known as the Royal Summit Room, preparations were underway. Silver trays were laid out with tea, files arranged in perfect order, chairs lined in a semicircle. It looked like a board meeting, not a family discussion, because in the monarchy, family is business. King Charles sat at the head once again, weary but composed. William took the seat on his right, papers in hand, his expression unreadable, and, ever the pragmatist, sat to the left. Camilla lingered a few steps away, pretending disinterest, but listening to every word. And then came the detail that changed everything. Harry had agreed to attend. Yes, despite what had happened, despite the explosive conversation the night before, he had insisted on facing them. Some called it courage. Others called it recklessness. But one thing was clear. This summit would not end with hugs and tea. When Harry arrived, there was no grand entrance, no smiles for cameras. Just a young man in a black suit, hands buried in his pockets, walking into a room where every eye already judged him. He didn't bow. He didn't even nod. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. The words hit the air like frost. William straightened. Anne's jaw tightened. Camilla exhaled slowly, already sensing the explosion waiting to happen. Charles spoke first, his voice calm but strained. "We're here because this family deserves clarity," he said. "There are things that were said in private that cannot be ignored." Harry didn't look at him. "And you believe everything you hear?" William's reply came sharp and immediate. "We believe what we know, Harry. You said it. More than once." Harry's eyes flicked up, a flash of defiance. "Maybe if anyone had listened to me for the last 10 years, I wouldn't have had to. You could have cut the air with a knife." There it was, the raw wound behind all the headlines. The feeling of being unheard, overshadowed, outcast. The eternal spare, speaking to the heir and the king. Charles leaned forward, the weight of the crown suddenly heavy even in private. "You've spoken against this institution before, but this was different," he said. "You accused your own family of corruption and deceit." Harry shot back. "I spoke the truth." And then, silence again. Because truth, inside those walls, is a dangerous word. And broke the quiet. "Do you even understand what your words do to this country? To the people who still believe in us?" Harry's laugh was short and bitter. "Believe in what, Anne? A fairy tale? You think the world hasn't figured out what this place really is?" The king's face hardened. "Enough," he said softly. But the softness was worse than a shout. William's patience finally snapped. "You're destroying everything Mum tried to protect," he shouted, slamming a hand on the table. Harry looked him dead in the eye. "No, William. I'm exposing what killed her." The room froze. Camilla flinched, just barely, but enough for everyone to notice. Charles's hand trembled slightly, gripping his ring. Anne's lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. And that was the moment the summit shifted from confrontation to catastrophe. Because no one had expected Harry to go there. The mention of Diana wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. A wound reopened before the world's oldest family. "Do you even hear yourself?" William said, voice low, dangerous. You're blaming everyone but yourself. Harry leaned forward, voice trembling but steady. You think you're the only one who lost her? You gotta grieve in private. I had cameras shoved in my face while you hid behind palace walls pretending everything was fine. Charles's composure cracked. We all suffered, Harry. We all did. Then why did I grow up feeling like I didn't matter? For a split second, the king looked broken, not as a monarch, but as a father. But it didn't last. He straightened, clearing his throat, and turned to his aides. We're done. That was it. 3 words that sealed the mood, the tone, and eventually, Harry's fate. But Harry wasn't finished. You want the truth? Fine, he said, rising from his chair. You want to know what I said in that meeting you're all so angry about? I said this family hides behind kindness, but feeds on control. That the monarchy isn't a symbol of unity, it's a cage. No one moved. Then, after a long, painful pause, William said quietly, and you think saying that to foreign officials won't destroy everything Mum stood for? Harry took a breath. Maybe it's time everything she stood for finally changed. And there it was. The unspoken fear turned into spoken rebellion. That's when Anne pushed back her chair and stood. You've made your choice, she said coldly. You've left us no choice. But here's what no one realized in that room. Harry wasn't there just to defend himself. He was there to provoke, to draw a line in the sand. And he knew exactly what he was doing. He turned to Charles and said, You can take away my titles, my privileges, my name if you want. But you'll never take the truth away. Charles didn't answer. He couldn't. Because deep down, part of him feared his son might be right. And that's the tragedy of it all. This wasn't just rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was pain, decades in the making, bursting through centuries of royal silence. But the monarchy doesn't operate on emotion. It operates on structure, on image, on power. And when Harry walked out of that room, the machinery began to turn. Behind those gilded doors, plans shifted. Royal advisors drafted separation frameworks. Lawyers reviewed constitutional clauses. And within hours, an internal document began circulating, one that discussed the withdrawal of honorary privileges pending review. Sounds mild, doesn't it? But in palace language, that's code for exile. Still, the question lingered. Why would Harry provoke this? What was his endgame? Maybe he thought he could shock them into honesty. Maybe he wanted to burn bridges so thoroughly that no one could ever drag him back into their shadow. Or maybe he believed he could survive without them. But as the day went on, a different kind of battle began, the media war. Because while that summit was supposed to remain secret, whispers began leaking within hours. Details surfaced. A tense family confrontation, unforgivable words, an emotional outburst from the Duke of Sussex. And across the ocean, Meghan's team began feeding narratives of their own. She's devastated, one anonymous source said. Harry tried to make peace. They ambushed him. 2 stories. 2 sides. Both believable. Both designed to win the sympathy war. Inside the palace, it was chaos. Who leaked? How? Why so fast? Charles reportedly threw his reading glasses down and said, We can't fight both the press and our own children. But fight they did. A palace spokesperson quickly issued a vague statement. His Majesty's family discussions remain private. That was all. But in the world of royal language, remain private is often code for something terrible just happened. And the press knew it. By the following morning, every major outlet was running versions of the same question. Has Prince Harry finally crossed the line? But inside that question was another, one the palace didn't want anyone asking. What did Prince William reveal that was so damaging? It forced the king to consider banning his own son. Because remember, we still don't know exactly what William read from that folder. The words have never been made public. But those who've heard fragments describe them as deeply personal and impossible to forgive. That's the kind of secrecy that fuels a monarchy. But here's the irony. The more they try to hide, the more people want to know. And someone, somewhere, decided the world should know. That's why, just 3 days later, a mysterious file appeared in the inbox of a veteran royal correspondent, an anonymous tip labeled from the inside. It contained fragments of the very conversation William had referenced. Was it authentic? Was it fabricated? No one could prove either way. But it was enough to send shockwaves through both Windsor and Westminster. Because if those transcripts were real, they suggested that Harry had accused members of his family of actions that went far beyond gossip. things that could have serious implications if investigated. And suddenly, what had been a family feud became a national crisis. Meetings were called. Security was heightened. Communications between the royal offices and government liaisons intensified. Because now, it wasn't just about family betrayal. It was about protecting the monarchy itself. But there's one detail that most people missed. While the palace scrambled to contain the fire, Meghan was making a move of her own, reaching out to an American network producer she'd worked with before. Her goal? To tell their side of the story. A story that, according to her pitch, would reveal the emotional abuse, the manipulation, and the lies that drove Harry away. It was bold, dangerous, strategic, and when the palace found out, that's when everything exploded. Because for the first time in history, a member of the royal family wasn't just being exiled. He was preparing to fight back, publicly, globally, and with receipts. The royal summit that was supposed to bring peace had instead lit a fuse. And everyone knew what came next wouldn't be negotiation. It would be war. But the first battle wouldn't be fought in newspapers or courtrooms. It would be fought in whispers, leaks, and midnight phone calls, where one brother would finally learn the full extent of what the other had done. And that revelation would make betrayal look merciful. Because William wasn't finished revealing the truth. He had one more thing to show, something Harry didn't even know existed. And when it came to light, it would destroy what little was left of their brotherhood. What Harry said in private was never meant for the public ear. It was the kind of conversation that happens when anger and exhaustion boil over, when a person stops worrying about diplomacy and just speaks. But when that person happens to be a prince, and those words reach the wrong ears, the world changes. So let me ask you, how dangerous can a few words really be? In Harry's case, they were lethal. It began during a private dinner in California, months before the summit. No cameras. No handlers, just Harry, a few friends, and a handful of guests connected to foreign foundations and media executives. It was supposed to be an informal evening, good wine, good food, friendly conversation. But the tone changed after the third glass of wine, when someone casually mentioned King Charles's upcoming reforms for the monarchy. Harry laughed. Reforms? He said. You can't reform a system that's built on silence and manipulation. You can only dismantle it. At first, his guests thought he was joking, but his expression didn't change. He went on, unfiltered, emotional, and bitter. You know what it's like to live in a family where image is worth more than truth? Where grief becomes a performance. I tried to play the game for years, and all it gave me was trauma dressed up as tradition. He paused, swirling his glass. They talk about duty, but what they mean is obedience. What they call loyalty is really fear. And every smile you see on those palace balconies hides 100 secrets. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His words were steady, deliberate, like a confession. One of the guests, a British journalist who had once covered royal affairs, quietly recorded parts of the conversation on her phone. It was instinct, not malice. But that instinct would later become the fuse for the biggest royal crisis since Diana's Panorama interview. Harry continued. They made me the scapegoat because I wouldn't shut up. Because I wouldn't let them rewrite Mum's story. They covered for William, for Camilla, for everyone, but not for me. I was the problem. The broken one. The angry one. The one they could throw to the wolves and call it mercy. And then came the line that reportedly made the royals see red. I sometimes think the monarchy deserves to fall. Not because I hate them, but because they've forgotten what being human means. It was a devastating sentence, blunt, emotional, and completely out of step with royal protocol. But what made it worse was what came after. Harry leaned closer to his guests. You want to know the truth? If my father wasn't the king, he'd be just another man trying to fix the mistakes he made as a father. But he hides behind the crown because it's easier than admitting he failed us. Someone asked him if he really believed that. Harry replied, I know it. And those two words, I know, spread like wildfire. A week later, fragments of that conversation reached London through a diplomatic intermediary who had attended the dinner. At first, the palace dismissed it as exaggerated gossip. But when the recording surfaced, raw and undeniable, William listened to it in disbelief. He had heard Harry angry before, but not like this. What hurt most wasn't the criticism. It was the calm, the conviction, the sense that Harry didn't see them as family anymore. And that, more than anything, was what William brought to their father's attention in that folder, the unvarnished transcript of Harry's words. Now imagine being in William's shoes for a moment. You're sitting there, holding the evidence that your brother, your childhood confidant, has turned his back on everything your mother fought to preserve. Do you protect him? Or do you protect the legacy? William chose the latter. Because when the recording played in the king's private study, the impact was immediate. Charles's face went pale. His lips parted, but no words came. It was as if decades of effort to hold his family together had been erased in a few minutes of unguarded speech. And was the first to break the silence. He's declared war, she said. Whether he knows it or not. Camilla, always poised, simply whispered, and the press will eat us alive when this gets out. William didn't say anything. He just replayed the section where Harry said, "The monarchy deserves to fall." The second time they heard it, no one looked at each other. But here's what made this moment truly chilling. The fact that it wasn't just anger or betrayal in Harry's voice. There was conviction, purpose, almost clarity. It was the sound of someone who had already accepted exile before it was even handed down. But not everyone saw it that way. Some aides argued that Harry's comments, while harsh, were private and emotional, not political. Others said it didn't matter. Perception was everything. Once the monarchy's integrity was questioned from within, it became a threat to national stability. And that's when the royal machinery began moving quietly, efficiently, like clockwork. Phone calls were made to legal advisors. Media monitoring intensified. A strategy was drafted to reassert the dignity of the crown in light of defamatory statements by extended family members. But William wasn't satisfied with bureaucratic damage control. He wanted something decisive. Something that made clear that betrayal had consequences. He pushed for a family intervention, what insiders later called the Summit of Truth. And when that meeting finally took place, he came armed not only with the transcript, but with something else, a digital file stamped with a timecode. The original recording. It said that when he played it for the king and Anne, he couldn't look at the screen. The sound of Harry's voice filled the room, low and steady. Every smile you see on those palace balconies hides 100 secrets. The silence that followed was absolute. For a few moments, no one breathed. Then Charles stood and said quietly, "He's not my enemy. He's my son." Anne's reply was cold and immediate. "He's both." The debate that followed lasted for hours. The options were clear but brutal. Do nothing and risk public exposure. Or act and risk looking heartless. Charles hesitated. William didn't. He argued that the monarchy could survive scandal, but not sabotage from within. That silence would look like weakness. And when he looked his father in the eye and said, "He's left us no choice," it wasn't out of anger. It was out of despair. Because deep down, William still loved his brother. He just no longer recognized him. By nightfall, the Royal Communications Office had drafted an internal memo. A full review of the Duke of Sussex's royal privileges and positions is underway. They didn't say banished. They didn't have to. But let's pause for a second. Because in all this, one question remains. How did Harry's private words become public knowledge in the first place? Who leaked that recording? Here's where things get complicated. The journalist who had captured the audio never intended to release it. But someone accessed her phone data through a shared network backup. A security breach traced to a third-party PR firm based in London. And guess who had used that same firm for years? Meghan Markle. Coincidence? Perhaps. But inside the palace, no one believed in coincidences anymore. When word reached the king that Meghan's former associates might have handled the file, the anger was volcanic. Camilla reportedly slammed her teacup down and said, "She's orchestrating this." Charles's response was simple. "Then we end it." That's how fast things move in royal crisis mode. Within hours, new protocols were established. Harry's access to private palace servers was revoked. Security clearances were reviewed. And quietly, behind closed doors, the phrase "indefinite suspension of royal duties" was added to his file. Still, Harry had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. He believed his family's anger would cool, that they'd eventually understand. He even sent William a message, short, almost casual. "We need to talk. No press. Just us." William never replied. Instead, he prepared something else, an unthinkable act of loyalty to the crown that would soon destroy the last thread of trust between the brothers. He decided to confront Harry not in private, but in front of their father. That confrontation, the one you heard about in Chapter 1, was the direct result of this recording. And while the world thought the two brothers were meeting to reconcile, they were really there to confirm betrayal. That's why William's voice trembled when he said, "You said it." More than once. He wasn't guessing, he had proof. And Harry's silence in that moment said everything. He knew exactly what William had heard. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because someone else heard that recording, too. Someone outside the family, someone who shouldn't have. An unnamed media executive, believed to have ties to one of Meghan's new production contacts, had been sent a copy for safekeeping. It was insurance, pure and simple. Insurance against what? Against exactly what was happening now. If the palace moved to strip Harry and Meghan of their last remaining privileges, the recording could be released, at full length, to the press. It was a stalemate. The palace couldn't punish him without risking public exposure. And Harry couldn't back down without betraying his own narrative. In the middle of this storm, William faced a moral dilemma. Did he protect his brother and risk the monarchy, or protect the monarchy and lose his brother forever? He chose the crown, and that choice, once made, could never be undone. Because when the king finally acted, when he quietly ordered the review that would lead to Harry's unofficial banishment, it wasn't just the end of a royal relationship. It was the beginning of a royal war. And as one insider later said, William might have fired the first shot, but Meghan had already planned her counterattack. The fuse was burning fast. And what came next wouldn't be a family feud anymore. It would be an explosion. Because William wasn't done revealing the truth. He still had something else, something that hadn't yet been made public. And when he showed it to the king, it made even and go silent. A piece of evidence so shocking, so personal, that it changed not only how they saw Harry, but what they believed about Diana's legacy itself. That revelation would break the royal illusion completely. And it was coming next. The king's study had never felt smaller. That room, lined with centuries of portraits and oak shelves, had witnessed royal triumphs and disasters. But on this particular evening, it was about to host something far more human. A confession, and not from Prince Harry this time. William had been pacing for nearly 10 minutes before his father arrived. His jaw was tight, hands clasped behind his back like a soldier awaiting orders. The weight of what he was about to say pressed on him like armor. Heavy, necessary, suffocating. When Charles entered, he looked exhausted. The gray beneath his eyes had deepened, his voice gravelly from nights without rest. "William," he said softly, "this is not the time to reopen wounds." But William didn't respond. Not immediately. He waited until the door closed behind the last aide, then turned, eyes sharp, the folder in his hand once again. "I have to tell you something," he said. Charles sighed. "Not more recordings, please. I don't want to hear his voice again." William shook his head. "It's not about Harry's voice this time. It's about what he's protecting." That got the king's attention. Because this wasn't a continuation of the scandal. It was the beginning of something darker. Charles gestured for him to continue. "What do you mean?" William hesitated. His voice dropped lower, steadier. "There's something in his possession, a letter. Something from Mom. He's been holding on to it for years." The king's face stiffened. "A letter from Diana?" William nodded. "It's not one of the ones released to the archives. It's personal, private. He told someone in California that it proves everything he's been saying about us." The room went silent again, that same deafening royal silence that always preceded catastrophe. Charles moved toward the window, staring out at the dark gardens below. "Your mother wrote many things when she was hurting," he said quietly. "I've made peace with most of them." William's voice hardened. "This isn't about peace. It's about control." He's using her words to justify everything, to paint us as villains. He's twisting her memory. Charles turned sharply. "And you think showing me this helps?" "I think you need to know what he's capable of," William said. "Because this isn't about emotion anymore. It's strategy." Meghan's team has been feeding this narrative for months, about how Harry's the one carrying Diana's true spirit, and the rest of us are part of the machine that destroyed her. He placed a small USB drive on the table between them. That's everything. Every communication, every message, every contact he's had with the people involved. It's not rumor anymore, Father. It's proof. Charles stared at the drive, not touching it. "You've been investigating your own brother?" William didn't flinch. "I had to. You needed to know." The king's expression changed. Not anger, not disappointment, but something worse. Weariness. William, this is not how families heal. And yet, part of him already knew healing was no longer possible. William's tone softened for the first time. Do you think I want this? Do you think I enjoy turning over stones and finding more rot underneath? I wanted him back, father. I tried. But he's not coming back. He's burning everything. Charles turned away again, his shoulders sagging. And so you burn him first. Better that, William said quietly, than letting him burn the crown. A long silence followed. The ticking of the clock became almost unbearable. Then, finally, Charles walked over to the table and picked up the drive. He didn't plug it in. He didn't even look at it. He just held it, like something poisonous, like the very idea of opening it would confirm every nightmare a father could have about his son. Tell me, he said. What's in it? William exhaled slowly. Evidence of communication between Harry and the producers working on that so-called documentary series about royal truth. Emails, meeting notes, and drafts. Drafts of something worse. A memoir. A second one. The words hit like a blow. Charles turned, stunned. Another book? William nodded. He's calling it The Uncrowned Truth. It's more than gossip this time. It's personal accounts, recordings, private letters, names. Including yours. Including mine. The king's hands trembled. How do you know? Because he told people in Montecito he'd already started writing it. He said, the palace can't silence me twice. The silence that followed felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Charles slowly sat down, his hand covering his mouth. He wouldn't. But William interrupted. He would. He already has. There was a bitterness in his tone, not of cruelty, but of heartbreak. The kind that comes from realizing the person you once trusted most has become your adversary. Charles whispered. And you're sure? I verified it. There's a ghostwriter involved. American. Anonymous for now. But the manuscript is being shopped quietly through intermediaries. He's waiting for the right moment, probably after the anniversary of the Queen's death, to maximize attention. The king's face drained of color. He'd use his grandmother's death for headlines? William didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. For a few moments, neither spoke. Then, Charles said quietly, you said this was a confession. What are you confessing to? And that's when William looked his father in the eye and said the words that changed everything. I'm the one who gave the order to monitor his communications. The king froze. For a moment, he didn't understand what he was hearing. You what? William's voice didn't waver. After the interview with Oprah, after Spare, after everything, we had to know what he'd do next. I authorized the private investigation. Quietly. Through security contacts. It wasn't official. It wasn't sanctioned. Charles stared at him, horrified. You spied on your own brother? Yes, William said flatly. Because he's not just my brother anymore. He's a liability. The king stood, his voice trembling with rage. You violated every principle this family stands for. William met his gaze. And what principles would those be, father? The ones that say we pretend everything's fine until it explodes in the papers? The ones that killed Mom. Charles's mouth opened, but no words came. Because deep down, he knew William wasn't entirely wrong. The monarchy had survived for centuries on secrecy, on managing appearances, on controlling the story before it controlled them. What William had done might have been morally wrong, but strategically, it was devastatingly effective. The information he'd gathered could end Harry's credibility overnight. And Charles, despite his anger, knew it. He turned away again, staring at the portraits of his ancestors on the wall. Kings who had faced rebellions, wars, betrayals of every kind. He wondered if they would see this as any different. Finally, he spoke, softly, almost brokenly. You've turned brother against brother. William's reply was immediate. He did that when he sold the story to the world. Charles's shoulders slumped. You think destroying him will save us? William's expression was unreadable. No, but it will stop him from destroying you. And that was the confession. Not just the spying, not just the evidence, but the admission that William had crossed a line, one he couldn't uncross. But before the conversation could go any further, there was a knock on the door. An aide stepped in, face pale. Your Majesty, there's been a situation. Charles turned. What kind of situation? The aide hesitated. A leak, sir. The press has obtained partial transcripts of last week's meeting. Both men froze. William's voice was sharp. Which meeting? The private summit, sir. The one with the Duke of Sussex. Charles's face went white. Impossible. That was contained. The aide swallowed hard. It appears a foreign outlet, American, has published excerpts. They're claiming Prince William presented classified material about the Duke's private affairs. For the first time, William's composure cracked. Classified, he repeated. They're calling it that. Yes, sir. They say it's evidence of a family cover-up. The king slumped into his chair. The air seemed to thicken. He turned slowly to his son. You see? The moment we fight back, the world turns on us. Every move becomes ammunition. William clenched his fists. Then we control the next move. How? By finishing this. If we don't act now, he'll destroy everything we've built. I'll take the blame if I must. But he needs to be removed, officially this time. Charles's eyes filled with something between fury and grief. You're talking about your own blood. William's tone softened but didn't break. And you're talking about the crown. One of them has to survive. It was that single, chilling line that ended the conversation. The king didn't answer. He simply looked at his son, perhaps seeing for the first time the man he'd raised, a man hardened not by privilege, but by necessity. The next day, the royal advisors met in secret. Papers were signed. Decisions made. Harry's status was officially under review. But in private, everyone knew what that meant. He was finished. And yet, the irony? Harry didn't even know it yet. As the palace prepared its next move, he was still in California, planning something that would upend everything again. Because while the monarchy believed they'd silenced him, he was preparing to speak louder than ever, armed with something they didn't even know existed. A secret Diana left behind. And when he unveiled it, it wouldn't just expose his family. It would expose the monarchy itself. The night before the official decision, Buckingham Palace looked peaceful from the outside. Lights glimmered across the courtyard, guards stood in formation, and London slept, unaware that behind those golden windows a dynasty was quietly tearing itself apart. Inside, the corridors pulsed with whispered orders and silent movements. Staff were instructed not to speak of anything they'd seen. Phones were confiscated, files sealed, schedules cleared. Every trace of what was about to happen had to be buried, because the order that was coming wasn't just about discipline. It was about erasure, and it started with 5 words from the king. Prepare the document in silence. That phrase, spoken calmly, deliberately, set everything in motion. William had already left the palace by then, his mind spinning. He'd just confessed to the unthinkable, spying on his own brother, manipulating internal channels, uncovering secrets that should have stayed buried. But deep down, he knew what was next. The monarchy doesn't heal with apologies, it heals with distance. So when the king's private secretary, Sir Michael Tregoron, entered the study at dawn, he already knew the assignment. Your Majesty, he said, voice low, do we proceed with full withdrawal of privileges? Charles didn't look up. He was staring at a framed photo of Diana on the desk, one taken before everything fell apart. Her smile looked almost defiant now, as if she'd foreseen all this. After a long pause, he finally said, no announcements, no statements, no drama, just absence. Absence, sir. He'll know soon enough. That was how the command began, not with anger, but exhaustion. The kind that comes after years of defending, explaining, forgiving. The royal banishment of Prince Harry wasn't to be declared. It was to be performed. Quietly, invisibly, irreversibly. First came the administrative shifts. Harry's official staff liaisons within the palace were reassigned, temporarily, to other departments. His security clearance for royal briefings was quietly downgraded. Access to encrypted communication lines, revoked. Then came the symbolic cuts. The Sussex crest was removed from the internal correspondence registry. The line of succession page on the palace's private intranet, restricted. Even the official family group photograph, displayed in the king's office, was replaced with a new one: Charles, Camilla, William, Kate, and their children. Harry's frame was moved to a private archive. No ceremony, no confrontation, just disappearance. That's how the royal institution exiles someone. Not with banishment, with deletion. But what makes this moment almost haunting is what happened behind the scenes. How every decision, every signature, came with hesitation. Because Charles wasn't just cutting off a rebellious son. He was repeating history. The same history that once haunted his own mother when she faced the crisis of Edward VIII. The same fear of scandal, of public disgrace, of legacy collapsing under the weight of emotion. He even used her old phrasing from those 1936 archives as a guide. All communications, the note read, are to be conducted with the utmost discretion. The preservation of the institution must outweigh personal sentiment. Personal sentiment, meaning love, meaning forgiveness, meaning family. But Charles couldn't afford sentiment now. Not after the leaks. Not after the recordings. Not after William's confession that surveillance had gone too far. The monarchy had to act as one body, one face, one unbreakable silence. And yet, even as he signed the directive, he whispered something under his breath that Sir Michael barely caught. "God help me," he said. "He's still my boy." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Harry woke to a phone call that changed everything. It wasn't from the palace. It was from an aide, a friend who'd quietly stayed in touch despite orders to cut contact. "Harry," she said softly, "they're moving against you." "What do you mean?" "They're shutting you out. Systems, calls, invites, everything. It's happening now." Harry sat up in bed, stunned. "You're saying they've what?" "Cut me off. It's not public yet, but it's official. You're no longer on the internal registry." He didn't answer for a few seconds. Then came a quiet, bitter laugh. "So that's it then? That's how they do it." The aide hesitated. "You should speak with your father." He hung up. That same day, he received a formal courier envelope stamped with the royal seal. The message was brief, stripped of warmth. "The circumstances of recent events necessitate a review of official relations between the Crown and the Duke of Sussex. Until further notice, royal privileges, access, and obligations are suspended." Suspended. That word, cold, bureaucratic, almost harmless, cut deeper than any insult. He read it 3 times. Each one hurt more than the last. Because suspended wasn't temporary. It was indefinite. It was exile wrapped in formality. In Montecito, Meghan found him sitting at the kitchen counter, staring at the letter. Her expression hardened before she even asked. "What did they say?" He handed it to her. She read it slowly, her jaw tightening. Then she said, "They've declared war." Harry said nothing. But deep down, he knew she was right. Because no matter how polite the language was, this wasn't administrative. It was personal. And it wasn't just about punishment, it was about power. By removing him quietly, the palace had achieved what they'd always wanted: control over the narrative. Now, every story Harry told would sound like bitterness. Every revelation like revenge. The world would see him as the angry exile, while the crown remained composed, dignified, unbothered. But here's the thing. Harry had something they didn't. That letter from Diana. The one William warned the king about. It was his last card. His proof that the monarchy had always silenced the truth. And he planned to use it. The question wasn't if, it was when. Back in London, the mood at Buckingham Palace was eerily calm. The order had been executed. There were no leaks, no scandal. On paper, the Duke of Sussex was simply under administrative review. But everyone inside knew what it meant, and was the only one who confronted Charles directly. "You've done it," she said quietly. "You've made him the new Edward." Charles's reply was quiet, almost resigned. Edward left for love. Harry left for truth. Both couldn't live with the crown. That night, he couldn't sleep. He paced the floor, staring again at Diana's photograph. He wondered what she would have said if she'd seen their sons like this. One exiled, one hardened. Both broken in their own ways. But just as he sat down, a knock came at the door. His private secretary entered, carrying a brown envelope. "Sir, this just arrived at the gatehouse. No sender listed. Hand-delivered." Charles frowned. "At this hour?" "Yes, sir. Security cleared it. They thought you should see it." Inside was a folded letter and a single photograph. The letter, in familiar handwriting, read, "If you're reading this, it means my boys are at war. Please remind them that love must come before duty, or duty will destroy them both." It was signed Diana. The photograph was of William and Harry, taken at Kensington Gardens decades ago. 2 boys laughing under the sun, free from crowns, from duty, from destiny. Charles didn't move for a long time. He just stared at the paper, his hand trembling. Then he said softly, "She knew." When he looked up again, the determination in his eyes was gone, replaced with something else. Fear. Because if that letter had resurfaced, someone must have had access to Diana's private archive. And there was only one person who'd hinted at that before. Harry. Which meant the war wasn't over. It had just begun, and the next blow wouldn't come from London. It would come from California. Because that letter, Diana's final message, wasn't the only thing Harry had. He had the diary too, the one no one ever knew existed. And what it contained would make the monarchy's silence look like guilt. But before the world saw it, the palace would make one last desperate move to stop him, one that would turn brother against brother once and for all. And the first move of that war would come from William himself. The sun was setting over Montecito when Meghan decided she wouldn't stay silent any longer. The California light was warm and golden, the kind that softens everything it touches, except the expression on her face. On the kitchen counter, the letter from the palace still lay open, its official seal glinting under the light. Harry hadn't moved from his chair in nearly an hour. His hands were clasped, his eyes distant, as if he were watching something collapse in slow motion. Meghan, however, was done watching. "Do you really think they're going to stop there?" she asked. "You know how they work, Harry. They don't just cut you off. They erase you." Harry said nothing. "First it's the titles, then it's the charities, then it's your image. They'll make you the villain in every paper from London to Sydney." He finally looked up, his voice hoarse. "Maybe I deserve it." Her eyes flashed. "Don't you dare say that." He leaned back, exhaling. "I crossed a line, Meg. I said things I shouldn't have." Meghan stepped closer, planting her hands on the counter. "You told the truth. That's what they can't forgive." There was silence, heavy, simmering, unspoken. Then she said something that changed everything. "If they want war," she whispered, "we'll give them war." That night, Meghan made a series of phone calls. Not to lawyers, not to friends, to producers. Because while the palace operated in silence, Meghan understood something the royals never did. Control the narrative, and you control the truth. Her plan was simple but audacious. Launch a public defense before the palace could spin the story. A carefully crafted interview series, framed as a journey of healing, where Harry could speak his truth, but this time, on their terms. The project had a working title, Unspoken. By dawn, she'd contacted 3 trusted allies, a top Hollywood publicist, a streaming executive she'd met during her Netflix deal, and a well-known American journalist famous for handling controversial stories with a sympathetic touch. The goal? To get ahead of the palace before they went public with the banishment. It wasn't just PR, it was preemptive survival. Meanwhile, across the ocean, William had already anticipated this. He knew Meghan wouldn't stay quiet. He even predicted the network she'd approach. In his view, it wasn't about truth for her. It was about revenge, about reclaiming the spotlight she believed the crown had stolen. So he acted first. Behind the scenes, the Royal Communications Office began leaking controlled narratives to select media contacts, trusted royal correspondents who'd print whatever version the palace preferred. Prince Harry's private remarks have caused deep pain, one insider reportedly said. His actions left the king with no choice. Those words, no choice, were intentional. They painted the king as reluctant, merciful, heartbroken. They painted Harry as impulsive, self-destructive, and, most importantly, untrustworthy. And in the court of public opinion, perception is everything. Within 48 hours, the palace's version of events dominated headlines. Phrases like Harry's self-inflicted exile and royal betrayal flooded the news cycle. Even in America, commentators began to shift tone. What had once been seen as Harry and Meghan's brave independence now looked, to some, like reckless defiance. But Meghan wasn't done. She knew how to fight back. Her next move was as bold as it was dangerous. She reached out to a high-profile talk show host known for live audience specials. The idea was to stage a televised, family truth-telling event, not unlike Diana's famous Panorama interview, but with a modern twist. Except this time, it wouldn't be a confession. It would be an accusation. And the hook would be irresistible. The monarchy tried to silence us. Here's what they didn't want you to know. Every network executive she spoke to said the same thing. If you can back it up, it'll be the biggest broadcast of the decade. And Meghan could back it up, because she had something the palace didn't know she had. The original copy of Diana's letter. Harry had shown it to her once, years ago, late at night, when he was drunk on nostalgia and heartbreak. He told her how he'd found it in an old box among his mother's effects. A handwritten note full of love, warning, and regret. At the time, he hadn't understood its significance. But Meghan did. Now, She saw it for what it was, a weapon. With that letter, she could frame their story not as rebellion, but as continuation, the next chapter of Diana's struggle against the institution that crushed her spirit. And if she positioned it right, Harry wouldn't be seen as the traitor, he'd be seen as the heir to Diana's truth. But the palace had ears everywhere. Before the first production meeting could even take place, a report landed on William's desk. A summary from royal security detailing possible media collaboration between the Sussex Circle and entertainment entities. The moment he read it, he knew. She's making a documentary, he muttered. She's going to use Mum's name. He stormed into the king's office, letter in hand. She's weaponizing her, he said, using her memory to justify this circus. Charles didn't look up from his desk. You think I don't know that? Then stop her, William said. Go public before she does. But the king shook his head. If we go public, we give her exactly what she wants, attention. William paced, furious. So we just sit here while she rewrites history? History rewrites itself, Charles said quietly. Our job is to endure it. But William couldn't endure it. He'd watched his brother walk away, watched his mother's legacy distorted for profit, and now he was watching the monarchy he'd been born to protect being dragged through fire again. So, he made a call of his own, to an investigative journalist known for discretion and influence. He offered something in return, a glimpse into the palace's side of the story. The journalist agreed. Within a week, an article appeared in a prestigious British publication titled Behind the Crown: The Pain of a Father, the Silence of a Son. It didn't mention Harry by name. It didn't need to. It painted a picture of a father heartbroken by betrayal and a son led astray by outside influences. It was the palace's chess move, subtle, sympathetic, devastatingly effective. Because when the article went viral, Meghan's upcoming media pitch suddenly lost its shine. Network executives grew nervous. We can't look like we're exploiting grief, one told her. But Meghan wasn't one to retreat. She pivoted again, faster, sharper, colder. She started leaking controlled fragments to friendly American outlets. Short, tantalizing quotes allegedly from close friends of the Duchess. Harry feels trapped again. The palace twisted his words. They never forgave him for speaking the truth. Each leak chipped away at the palace's narrative, bit by bit, turning the story into an emotional tug-of-war that gripped global headlines. And yet, amid all the noise, one truth remained buried. The letter. Because while Meghan teased it to producers, she never showed it to anyone. Not even Harry. She told him it was for their protection. But deep down, he began to wonder, whose protection? Then, one night, he found her laptop open on the dining table. A draft email sat unsent, addressed to a top streaming executive. Subject, Diana's last words, exclusive rights proposal. Harry's heart dropped. He stared at it for a long time, then shut the laptop quietly. He didn't confront her that night. He didn't sleep either. By morning, he was gone, his car heading toward the airport, his phone switched off. Where was he going? To London. To face his father. To demand answers. But when he arrived, the palace gates didn't open. The guards looked at him with the same polite detachment reserved for tourists. I'm here to see the king, he said. The guard hesitated, then radioed in. Moments later, a different guard approached, holding a small envelope. Sir, he said, this is for you. Inside was a short note, handwritten, bearing the royal crest. Harry, until circumstances improve, all official communication must be made through council. I wish you peace. Father. No signature. No warmth. Just a wall of silence between them. He folded the note slowly, his hands trembling. Then, he turned and walked away from the gates. The photographers waiting nearby captured every second of it. The lonely prince, rejected by his family, walking away from the palace that once called him son. By nightfall, those images were everywhere. And by dawn, the entire world was asking one question. Has Prince Harry been permanently banished? But the truth, the real truth, was far more complicated. Because while the palace thought it had silenced him, and Meghan thought she had cornered the narrative, something else had just surfaced. Someone inside the palace had begun leaking information. Not to protect the monarchy, but to destroy it. And the first document they sent to the press wasn't about Harry or Meghan. It was about Diana. The palace was supposed to be airtight. No leaks, no whispers, no cracks. For centuries, that was the unspoken rule. What happened behind those walls stayed there, buried under layers of etiquette and silence. But this time, silence was cracking. It started with a single headline. A small online publication no one in London took seriously, until everyone did. Exclusive, internal royal report reveals secret surveillance on Prince Harry. The article dropped like a bomb. It didn't come from a major outlet, but within minutes, it was trending worldwide. Because inside that short, cryptic post was one sentence that changed everything. Sources claim MI5 assisted the palace in monitoring communications between the Duke of Sussex and external parties. It was the kind of leak that couldn't be ignored. William woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing nonstop. His private secretary's voice was panicked. "Sir, we have a situation. The press is running with it. They're saying the palace spied on Harry." William's stomach turned. Who leaked it? We don't know. But they had access to internal language, phrasing only senior staff would know. The words hit him like ice. Someone close had turned. By mid-morning, the leak had reached Buckingham Palace. The king was furious, but also terrified. It wasn't just embarrassment. This was potentially a constitutional nightmare. If MI5 had been involved, it meant state resources were being used in a private family dispute. And that was illegal. Charles called an emergency meeting. No aides. No public relations team. Just him, William, and two trusted advisors. "Find out who did this," he said, his voice like thunder. "And make sure the world never connects this to us." But it was already too late. Within hours, foreign outlets were digging deeper. A reporter in Washington claimed to have verified details about the surveillance, including dates and call logs. In the background, whispers began about potential whistleblowers inside the Royal Communications Office. The walls that had held generations of secrets were beginning to sweat. The palace immediately launched what they called a security review, but everyone knew what it really was, a witch hunt. Staff were questioned, phones confiscated, emails audited, and, pragmatic as ever, handled the interrogations personally. "We will find whoever did this," she said coldly, "and they will regret it." But what no one realized was that the leaker wasn't just a staff member. It was someone with motive. Someone with access to both sides. A double agent. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Meghan was reading the same headlines and smiling. "This is it," she said quietly. "They've done it to themselves." Harry looked up from his laptop. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," she said. "If they really did spy on you, they've just confirmed everything you said in those interviews. You weren't paranoid. You were right." Harry frowned. "So what? We just let them implode." She leaned in. "No. We make sure the truth spreads faster than their excuses." That was Meghan's strength, turning every attack into an opportunity. Within hours, a statement appeared on a U.S. website tied to her new media project. It read, "Recent revelations confirm what we've endured for years: surveillance, manipulation, and the weaponization of power. The truth will come out." Short, emotional, explosive. The statement went viral. The palace tried to downplay it, but the damage was done. Every outlet, from CNN to BBC, wanted answers. Did the palace spy on Prince Harry? Behind the scenes, panic spread like wildfire. The king's private secretary ordered a full digital trace. Logs were analyzed, server access reviewed. By day 2, investigators found the first clue. A series of unusual data transfers from within the communications department. Encrypted files sent to an anonymous domain registered in Los Angeles. The IP address, traced to a public relations agency linked to one of Meghan's old business partners. When William saw the report, his hands went cold. "She's inside," he muttered. "She has someone feeding her." And didn't disagree. "She's playing chess while we're playing checkers." But Charles was losing control. He slammed the report on the table. "We can't accuse her publicly without proof." William's jaw tightened. "She's the proof." The king turned on him. "You started this by spying on your brother." For the first time, William snapped. "And you finished it by banishing him." The argument that followed was brutal. Two future kings, shouting across a desk built by their ancestors, while the monarchy burned around them. In the middle of it all, and stood silently, her arms crossed. When the shouting finally stopped, she said one sentence that silenced them both. "You're both missing the point," she said. "The leak didn't come from us. It came from someone who wants both of you to fall." The room froze. "What are you saying?" Charles asked. I'm saying this isn't a war between brothers anymore, and said, it's a war between families. And she was right. Because that night, another leak dropped. This one wasn't about surveillance. It was about Diana. An anonymous source provided scanned excerpts of what appeared to be her handwritten notes. Real or fabricated, no one could yet tell. But the timing was perfect. The headline read, Princess Diana predicted her sons would be torn apart by the crown. The note quoted her as writing, the institution will one day turn my boys against each other, and when that happens, they will destroy themselves. The world went wild. Suddenly, the story wasn't about Meghan or Harry or even the spying. It was about Diana's ghost haunting the monarchy again. For the palace, it was a nightmare. Reporters camped outside Buckingham's gates. Old footage of Diana played on repeat across every network. Commentators speculated endlessly. Had she foreseen this? Was her prophecy finally coming true? Inside the palace, Charles sat motionless at his desk, the leaked note in his hand. He whispered, she warned us. William didn't say a word. He just stared out the window, jaw tight. Because he knew something no one else did. That wasn't Diana's real handwriting. It was a fake. Someone had forged it. And whoever did it had access to Diana's private letters. The ones Harry had mentioned still existed. That meant only one thing. The leak wasn't just someone feeding Meghan. It was someone using her as cover. Someone far more dangerous. The next day, the Royal Security Task Force expanded the investigation. The search included royal archives, personal assistants, even digital historians who'd once handled Diana's estate. And that's when they found the real horror. One of Diana's sealed journals, catalogued but never released, was missing. Gone. The page number matched the supposed leaked note exactly. Someone had stolen it. But who? The palace had 3 suspects. A former aide dismissed years ago for leaking to tabloids. A private archivist with access to royal correspondence. Or someone much closer. Someone whose name was still protected by royal privilege. As Charles read the internal memo naming those possibilities, he felt something shift inside him. A cold, creeping suspicion he couldn't ignore. He looked at William. You said you'd stop the leaks. I did. Then why? The king asked, voice trembling. Does it feel like they're coming from you? William's face went pale. You think I? But before he could finish, another message arrived. An encrypted file, sent anonymously to both British and American newsrooms. It contained not just forged letters, but real ones. Real handwriting. Real ink. Real emotion. Diana's private thoughts about Charles. About the crown. About her sons.